first thing I want to talk about with you is the intertestamental literature, and then a little bit about how we got our Bible, where we got it from. Alita,
Can you turn yourself up, please?
can I turn myself up?
Yes.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not turned it back on, all right? Not turned it on, so thank you. All right, is that any better?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, the initial plan for this was to go 100 weeks altogether, and we would have done 20 weeks on the writings, so we'd have had a lot more time to do the Psalms, as well as Job and Proverbs and the others, and a little bit more time for each of these. But I decided when I was going to change my mind and decided to retire the end of the summer, that I would consolidate this and do the summer and at least finish it, rather than quitting in the springtime like I would have done it otherwise. So the material from the writings we finished last week with Chronicles. Today we're going to look at, in essence, this is the Apocrypha. These are all the books that are not in Protestant scriptures. Most of these are in the Roman Catholic scriptures, but not in the Protestant scriptures, not all of them. But anyway, so we're going to just look a little bit to have some content, some idea about that. And then I want to talk a little bit about just some very, very minimal things about how we get the scriptures, a few things that come along the way with that. But what Luther said was, if the Jewish people did not believe this was inspired, then he would not use that for doctrine. All right? And some things like praying for the dead are in this literature, in Maccabees. Okay? And so one of probably the big reasons why the Roman Catholic, or why the Jewish people did not consider it inspired, there is a real question. Judas Maccabeus was kind of irritated when people attacked them on the Sabbath day. He said, "You attack me on the Sabbath day because you know we're not supposed to do any work." The first week they attacked him on the Sabbath day. The next week they said, "God's going to give us a pass on this one." And they fought back. Some people who were Orthodox Jews said we should have kept getting killed on the Sabbath day. We should not have fought back. That's in, I think, First Maccabees chapter 2. This is called the Apocrypha, and many people talk about apocalyptic literature. Not much of this is apocalyptic. Apocalyptic goes much more into what we have in what's called the pseudepigrapha. So there are many writings that come from the era of Judaism that are not in this nor in our Bibles. So this is not the only stuff ever written. Lots of other things, and in essence, apocalyptic literature kind of draws the curtain back on the end of time. It says, in the end of time, there's going to be a final battle, and God is going to bring everything to fruition so that his kingdom will come. You will see that, for example, in the last chapters of Daniel. Daniel 7 to 12 is going to talk about that final battle of bringing everything together. If you know C.S. Lewis's trilogy, The Chronicles of Narnia, No.
Tolkien.
Huh?
Tolkien.
No, that's not the final battle, is it? No, that's the Return of the King. Tolkien has Perilanda, that hideous strength. No, that hideous strength is through. Where does the last? I think the last battle is in the Chronicles of Narnia, number 7. I think that is the title for the 7th one. But when it seems like evil is going to win and then good wins out in the end. You don't have much of that here, but what you have is a real big surprise. We've looked at all of these things about why the consequences from sin came on people. So our stage 1, God did this in the past. Stage 2, the people turned away from God. Stage 3, the consequences come on most of them for having turned away from God and hauling others down. And then stage 4, the remnant, the restoration that's going to come in the future that they were waiting for. In the era after the Persians, when the Greeks take over under Alexander the Great, all of a sudden, you start having people die because they are faithful instead of because they are faithless. Much of what we have here is narrative about that, or some stories about being faithful no matter what is going on, or a lot of what they call wisdom literature. This is the right way that you are to live. And so the order that I have in my original Apocrypha is changed a little bit in some of the newer versions. How many of you have read any of it ever? Okay, so some of you have seen some of those things. So Tobit and Judith, Tobit about, and we'll look at these all in a minute, but Tobit about a life in exile, Judith about life back home in the land, additions to Esther which include references to God, which and prayer which were not there before, the wisdom of Solomon, so this is not the same as Proverbs, Ecclesiasticus, a real long one, or the wisdom of Jesus, Sirach, Baruch, which is short, with the last chapter of Baruch being the letter of Jeremiah, the prayer of Azariah and the song of the three young men is right within the book of Daniel. So in the Greek it's there, but it's not there in the Hebrew. So there will be two prayers in the fiery furnace, one by Azariah and one by the three young men, which some of you might know. It is used in some of our liturgies, the song of the three young men of praising snow and rain and frost and all the things that God gives. Then Daniel chapter 13 in Greek is Susanna. Daniel 14 in Greek is Bel and the dragon. Then you have 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And then, though they're often connected with this, 1st and 2nd Esdras and the prayer of Manasseh, which are usually considered part of the Apocrypha, but which are not in the Roman Catholic deuterocanonical books. So anyway, a little bit about each of these. I'm going to just kind of read some of this through and tell you some of the story just a little. So, there is a story about a very honorable guy. So sometimes, like you have with Daniel and like you have with Esther, both of them in exile, but seeking to live honorable lives even in exile. Who would be your Old Testament pattern for that? Joseph. Joseph in Egypt is kind of like the model. No matter where you are, you stay faithful. So Tobit loses his eyesight while burying Jewish victims of the Assyrian oppression. So he is willing, he's at his home and he hears that someone has died, and he goes and he buries them. Well, after you bury somebody, then you're unclean till morning. So there's one time he has buried somebody who was killed in persecution, and he lies outside, and it said he got bird droppings on his eyes. What did he have? Cataracts. Okay? But they connected it with these bird droppings, you know, the white film over the eyes, okay? And then, because he is not able to see anymore, he had left some money with some relatives. And so Tobit says to his son Tobias, I want you to go and I want you to get the money from our relatives. He even gets very angry at his wife Sarah once. Somebody has given her, I think it's a goat or something like that, and he says, you stole that. She says, no, somebody gave it to me for the work I did. No, you stole it, go give it back. So he's trying to be an honorable fellow. But so we're in Mesopotamia, and then we go as far as Iraq, and then all the way into Iran. Well, during the same time, a close relative in the region to the east, across the Tigris River, which is the east side, there's a young lady named Sarah. And poor Sarah, every time her father and mother arrange for her to have a husband, the husband dies that night. Because there is a demon named Asmodeus who is in love with her and kills all her human partners. So her father and mother, they have to keep on trying to figure out what they're going to do about this. So anyway, Tobit says, I want you to go get this money. And I want you to go talk to our relatives. And so Tobias is told to do this, and he all of a sudden gets some help from God. Raphael. Okay, we know Raphael as an angel from other places in the Apocrypha, not in the Old Testament. Later it becomes one of the Ninja Turtles, right? Isn't Raphael one of the teenage Ninja Turtles or something? So anyway, Tobias and this Raphael, who looks like a human being, as they're going to go, and so they check Raphael out, they vet him and say he's going to be okay. They ought to vet him because he's really an angel. But so anyway, they go to recover those funds since Tobit is blind, he can't work anymore. So as they are going I think it's in the Tigris River, Raphael says, go catch a fish. They're going to catch a fish. There's this big fish, and he says, I want you to keep the liver and the heart and the gall. I always want to say the liver and the onions, but it's the liver and the heart and the gall to help Sarah and to help Tobit. So God is going to use some kind of little miraculous means to be able to do this. So Tobias comes to the house of Sarah and her family, and right away her father said, you kind of look to me just like my cousin Tobit. I'm his kid. I don't know whether Dale ever had this experience, but I had this happen to me once. When our principal at Lutheran High West retired, Mr. Weed, Kathy and I went to the dinner for him, and a man came up to me. He didn't say, you look like a trap. He said, you're Harvey's kid. So, Mr. Engel, Elmer Engel, who grew up next to my dad. House right next to house. And Mr. Engel, he was Mr. Lutheran in Detroit more than once. I think he worked for AAL as well, but he said, you're Harvey's kid. Right, and so we had a good laugh about that. And just a wonderful, wonderful man. But so he saw something right there. That's who I was. And he knew my other uncles as well, so he knew which one I belonged to. Well, here, Sarah's father says, you look like Tobit. Yep, I'm his kid. So, what's the problem? Closest relative? Got to marry Sarah. Already watched 7 guys have to get buried out back because of Asmodeus. Right? So, well, I guess we got to give you to the two of them, or I put the two of you together in marriage. So, what do we have now? Well, what are the 3 things? The liver and the heart and the gall. So he takes the liver and the heart and he burns it kind of like as a little smoky sacrifice, and Asmodeus gets the smoke in his eyes and goes running off all the way to southern Egypt and disappears. So he's out of the picture. Sarah's father, the next morning, he's already dug his grave for Tobias. He's already dug the grave, expecting he's going to be dead by morning. Well, let's bury him before anybody knows what happened. And finds out the 2 of them made it just fine during the night. So then Raphael goes and gets Tobit's money, and then they say, well, we better get back home before Mom and Dad are too worried about it. And so Tobit and Anna are waiting for them, and Anna is just sure that Tobias has been killed some way or another. And then they get back home, and what do they do with the gall? Spritz it on his eyes. Takes the film away, he can see again. They should have tried that. You know? They must have a lot of gall from fish when they catch them. You know, squirt that, save yourself a lot of money for your eyes. Anybody want any fish gall? But anyway, so finally Raphael explains who he is, and then goes poof and disappears. And Tobit then prays, thanks God for being gracious to him, and plans then, leaves a testament, and then we find out that Sarah and Tobias have a wonderful life, and see their descendants to many generations. What's it all about? Be honorable to God no matter what, no matter where. Okay, so this is going to say you need to be an honorable person for God, and then He will watch over you even if you are in exile. Right, so, nice little book. Next, and we get to the story of Judith. Do I have any of those summaries on the sheets that you have? Not sure. I think most of these I just had readings that the students were to do. So anyway, Judith. This one takes place back in the land, and you'll find sometimes some real odd historical references. So Nebuchadnezzar is not involved in defeating the Medes. The Medes and the Persians took over from Nebuchadnezzar. So some names are in here and some things that are wrong. But there is a general for the Assyrians named Holofernes, who is trying to make peace within the empire, and the Jewish people are the ones who make a lot of trouble. Here, they are back in the land, and so there is an Ammonite. Remember, Ammon is just northeast of the Sea of Galilee. All right, and so this Holofernes, he comes to Achior of Ammon, and he says, we're coming here to put down the rebellion by the Jews. And Achior says, fat chance, you're not going to be able to do it. They have their God on their side. And Holofernes gets very angry. So he takes Achior and he sticks him into Bethulia, one of the cities, and he says, you're going to die with all the rest of them. And so Achior, all I did was realize what's going on there. So then Holofernes is going to try to bring peace by a siege. In a siege, you wrap yourself around a city, you wait for everybody inside to starve to death. Yep. So you don't lose any soldiers that way. What's the best time of the year to do a siege?
Just before harvest.
After harvest,
At harvest. So what month? April. April. Okay, do it in March. By April, you've got the food outside. Their stores are down to very little. They're waiting for their new crop. And so anyway, the first half of this is just about all that, the first 7 chapters. Then chapters 8 to 16, how does a beautiful woman help them to be delivered? And so Judith is a beautiful woman. She is a pious widow. She's a young widow, and so she hears how she's going to do this, or what she's going to do, and she comes up with various kinds of things and intrigue. Not only that, but also to take care of saving the temple, which is nearby in Jerusalem. That's kind of a subtext of the whole thing. And so first of all, Judith prays to God for strength and for insight, and then it says that she dresses up in beautiful clothing. And she goes with her maidservant, and she says to Holofernes, I know that you are going to defeat my people. And I'm nervous about that. I wonder if I could find safe haven here, because they're doing something wrong and they shouldn't be. So would you please help me out? But she also says, I realize that one of the things that's going to happen is they're going to kill some animals, some cattle, and drink the blood. They're so thirsty. So I have to go out and pray every night and find out when they have done this. After they have done that, then God is going to give you the victory. So she sets up a pattern that every night she's going to leave and then come back. So for a couple of nights she goes out, and then she is brought back in by Holofernes all by himself. He wants to have sex with her. And so he chases everybody else out, and she gets him roaring drunk, and then chops his head off with his own sword. Now every day she's been leaving in the evening with her maidservant to go out to pray to find out when the Jewish people in Bethulia are going to sin, So she goes out as usual. In her little sack, she has his head. All right? Any other women you remember who won victories?
Yes.
Esther does.
Deborah?
Deborah. Yael, who kills the general Sisera and gets him with the tent peg. So that's the worst thing that can happen, is that a woman would win the victory because they didn't think women were strong enough to be victorious in battle. So if a woman won a victory, you would assume their God is on their side and you're up against bigger powers than you can handle. So anyway, when she brings the head back to Bethulia, the first convert is Achior. Right? I told them that, that you Jewish people had a God on your side. Now I really see it, because here's Holofernes dead, and he knew Holofernes because he had thrown him into Bethulia so they could all die together. So they put his head up on a pole outside the city, and the next morning when the Assyrians, as they're called here, go to wake Holofernes up, they find his body but no head. And it spooks them. They go run away. They say, we're going to break off from this. And then it says that Judith sings a song, and then that some temple spoil is restored. So this kind of subtext, not just delivered from technical attacks or sieges, but actually to help with the worship that's going on. So that's the first two. All right? And those are nice little stories. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the question here, I guess, it says, state in one sentence what this book would want to teach. Like you said before, what's the one sentence?
Be faithful to God no matter what, no matter where.
And that's the same as the one before that?
Both of them.
Okay, got it.
God will take care of those who are faithful.
Okay, thank you.
Now, you could throw in there the 3 men in the fiery furnace who don't even have their hair singed, and others. Does that always happen? Well, the guys going to the fire furnace said, we may die of this, but at least we're going to be faithful anyway. And then there's that fourth guy walking around. So this literature says, don't turn away from God because it seems inconvenient. And 1st and 2nd Maccabees, in very different ways, are going to say the same thing. God will be with us. So the deeper background in it is what we call holy war. Is the technical term. A lot of people would say God's war, that God says, I am going to carry out my will. Stay on his side and don't make treaties with the enemy. So in 1st, 2nd Maccabees, we're going to have those treaties made with the Greeks. In earlier generations, it was with Baal worship or with the Assyrians or the Babylonians or Persians or whomever. So anyway, the additions to Esther, I'm going to read you just a couple of these. Just so you get a little tiny sense of something. I can't read the whole of the other 2 books. Well, I could, but we aren't going to stay that long. But anyway, some of these are going to talk about, first of all, Artaxerxes sends these letters to permit the persecution of the Jews. We know that from the Daniel story, or from the Esther story. And Esther's piety is accentuated, and God's action to protect his scattered people is accentuated. So, I'll read just a couple of them. First of all, translated in the order of the Greek version of Esther, but with chapter and verse numbers from the King James Version. Did you know the King James Version has all of these? Yeah, the original King James Version translated all of those, but just said they're not part of the inspired Word of God, but we'll provide them for you anyway. Luther said it's good to read this because you find out what was going on during that time period. In the 2nd year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, on the 1st day of Nisan, Mordecai the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. He was a Jew dwelling in the city of Susa, a great man serving in the court of the king. He was one of the captives whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had brought from Jerusalem with Jeconiah, king of Judea. And this was his dream, and then there's a dream that goes on with that. Later, chapter 14 And Esther the queen, seized with deathly anxiety, fled to the Lord. She took off her splendid apparel and put on the garments of distress and mourning. And instead of costly perfumes, she covered her head with ashes and dung. And she utterly humbled her body, and every part that she loved to adorn she covered with her tangled hair. And she prayed to the Lord God of Israel and said, O my Lord, thou only art our king. Help me, who am alone and have no helper but thee, for my danger is in my hand. Ever since I was born, I have heard in the tribe of my family that thou, O Lord, didst take Israel out of all the nations, and our fathers from among all their ancestors for an everlasting inheritance, and that thou didst do for them all that thou didst promise. And now we have sinned before thee, and thou hast given us into the hands of our enemies, because we glorified their gods. Thou art righteous, O Lord, and now they are not satisfied that we are in bitter slavery, but they have covenanted with their idols to abolish what the mouth has ordained, and to destroy thy inheritance, to stop the mouths of those who praise thee, and to quench thy altar and the glory of thy house, to open the mouths of the nations for the praise of vain idols, and to magnify forever a mortal king. O Lord, do not surrender thy scepter to what has no being, and do not let them mock at our downfall, but turn their plan against themselves, and make an example of the man who began this against us. Remember, O Lord, make thyself known in the time of our affliction, and give me courage, O King of the gods and master of all dominion. Put eloquent speech in my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate the man who is fighting against us, so that there may be an end of him and those who agree with him. But save us by thy hand, and help us, who am alone and have no helper but thee, O Lord. And goes on from there. So what she's doing, in essence, in the Greek version, is she's talking to God, and both she and Mordecai are aware of God. In the original Hebrew book of Esther, the word God is not mentioned. So somebody who put that into Greek said, we've got to add some things to that to make that a little bit more holy and righteous than what it would sound otherwise. If memory serves me right, First Maccabees also has no mention of God in it. Okay, so it's just a historical record of what went on along the way. So anyway, there are 5 or 6 editions that are plugged in at various places. They're listed as at the end in the translations, but actually if you read in the Greek, they would be put in along the way to make her not willing to just be in the harem, but to keep herself safe and pure, and that she is there in the harem so that God can save his people through her. So it gives a kind of a religious framework and context for that. The next one is called the Wisdom of Solomon. And this sounds very much like the kind of thing that you would hear in the Book of Solomon. And I don't have a background on all of these kinds of things, but let me just read a little bit for you from that one as well, just so you get a feel for the kinds of things and see how much this sounds like Proverbs. I'll go from chapter 4. Better than this is childless with virtue, for in the memory of virtue is immortality, because it is known both by God and by men. When it is present, men imitate it, and they long for it when it is gone. And throughout all time it marches crowned in triumph, victor in the contest for prizes that are undefiled. But the prolific brood of the ungodly will be of no use, and none of their illegitimate seedlings will strike a deep root, or take a firm hold. For even if they put forth boughs for a while, standing insecurely, they will be shaken by the wind, and by the violence of the winds they will be uprooted. The branches will be broken off before they come to maturity, for their fruit will be useless, not ripe enough to eat, and good for nothing. For children born of unlawful unions are witnesses of evil against their parents when God examines them. But the righteous man, though he die early, will be at rest. For old age is not honored for a length of time, nor measured by numbers of years, but understanding is gray hair for men, and a blameless life is ripe old age. So, if you get killed young but you were honorable, you fulfilled your purpose. Okay? If you get to be old and you haven't fulfilled your purpose, then the number of years you live doesn't matter. There was one who pleased God and was loved by him, and while living among sinners he was taken up. He was caught up lest evil change his understanding, or guile deceive his soul. So, why did somebody die young? because God knew if he lived longer, he might be tempted to leave. But yanked him out before he could turn away from him. That's a bad answer. It's a bad answer. But it's how people try to say, how do we make sense of things that are hard to understand? Well, God knew that this one was going to be involved in drugs, and so he died earlier than that, so he wouldn't get caught up in drugs. For the fascination of wickedness obscures what is good, and roving desire perverts the innocent mind. Being perfected in a short time, he fulfilled long years, for his soul was pleasing to the Lord. Therefore he took him quickly from the midst of wickedness. Yet the peoples saw and did not understand, nor take such a thing to heart, that God's grace and mercy are with his elect, and he watches over his holy ones. The righteous man who has died will condemn the ungodly who are living, and the youth that is quickly perfected will condemn the prolonged old age of the unrighteous man. And on from that. So trying to make sense of things that are hard to make sense of. So discourse, first of all, in these chapters on the justice of God, praise of wisdom as a guide to life. I'll read you a little bit of this from chapter 6. The beginning of wisdom is the most sincere desire for instruction, and concern for instruction is love of her. And love of her is the keeping of her laws, and giving heed to her laws is assurance of immortality. There. You obey all the laws, you get to be immortal. That's the way it works, right? And can you imagine how Luther would have to deal with that? If that was part of sacred scripture? Don't think so. So the desire for wisdom leads to a kingdom. Therefore, if you delight in thrones and scepters, O monarchs over the peoples, honor wisdom, that you may reign forever. I will tell you what wisdom is and how she came to be. And I will hide no secrets from you, but I will trace her course from the beginning of creation, and make the knowledge of her clear. And I will not pass by the truth, neither will I travel in the company of sickly envy. For envy does not associate with wisdom. A multitude of wise men is the salvation of the world, and a sensible king is the stability of his people. Therefore be instructed by my words, and you will profit. Can you see why the wisdom of Solomon would be titled, with Solomon? He's the guy who's here's the right way to do it. He seems not to have followed that, according to what we hear later. So, and there's more than about what wisdom is. And then chapters 10 through 12, the title that's given here is that you've got wisdom as a key to history. And let's see, I'm going to start this one. Oh my. I'll just start with verse 1. Wisdom protected the first-formed father of the world when he alone had been created. She delivered him from his transgression, as if wisdom is a personal, kind of a person almost, and gave him strength to rule all things. But when an unrighteous man departed from her in his anger, he perished, because in rage he slew his brother. Who's that? Cain. So this says Cain is the one who brings sin into the world, not Adam. When the earth was flooded because of him, wisdom again saved it, steering the righteous man by a paltry piece of wood. Who's that? Noah. Wisdom also, when the nations in wicked agreement had been confounded, recognized the righteous man and preserved him blameless before God, and kept him strong in the face of his compassion for his child. Abraham. If you don't get any of these answers, we have to start this whole course over next week. We'll do another 50 weeks, so please try to get the answers right. Otherwise, I won't pass you on for approval. Wisdom rescued a righteous man when the ungodly were perishing. He escaped the fire that descended on the 5 cities. Lot. Oh, I got you going now. Evidence of their wickedness still remains, a continually smoking wasteland, plants bearing fruit that does not ripen, and a pillar of salt standing as a monument to an unbelieving soul. For because they passed wisdom by, they not only were hindered from recognizing the good, but also left for mankind a reminder of their folly, so that their failures could never go unnoticed. And then he goes on with some of the others as well. Then chapters 13 to 15, so after you have, and all of the 10 to 12 is all about various historical figures, and you have to kind of guess who they are. But then 13 to 15, the whole thing about the origins in the form of idolatry. For all men who were ignorant of God were foolish by nature, and they were unable from the good things that are seen to know him who exists, nor did they recognize the craftsman while paying heed to his works. But they supposed that either fire or wind or swift air or the circle of the stars or turbulent water or the luminaries of heaven were the gods that rule the world. If through delight in the beauty of these things men assumed them to be gods, let them know how much better than these is their Lord. For the author of beauty created them. And if men were amazed at their power in working, let them perceive from them how much more powerful is he who formed them. And so it'll go on in the whole thing about the creation. And then a little bit toward the end, I'll just pick up a little bit from chapter 15 here about the Israelites and the Egyptians here. So the enemies of the people worship even the most hateful animals, which are worse than all others. When judged by their lack of intelligence, and even as animals, they are not so beautiful in appearance that one would desire them, but they have escaped both the praise of God and his blessing. Therefore, those men were deservedly punished through such creatures, and were tormented by a multitude of animals. Instead of this punishment, thou didst show kindness to thy people. So, what is this? It says about the 10 plagues. Okay, that there were creatures that made trouble for the Egyptians. Thou didst prepare quails to eat, a delicacy to satisfy the desire of the appetite. Now we get into the wilderness, and we find that the quails that the Israelites wanted were bad, in order that those men, when they desired food, might lose the least remnant of the appetite, because of the odious creatures sent to them, while the people, after suffering want for a short time, might partake of delicacies. For it was necessary that upon those oppressors inexorable want should come, while to these it was merely shown how their enemies were being tormented. And then the wild beasts that come on the animals, the serpents and snakes and things like that. So it's quite a bit of this is going to be historical narrative from various parts of the Bible. Look at what happened back there and let it be either a warning to you or encouragement to you. Okay, so a lot of the wisdom things would pick up on things that they had learned from the past. The next one is, yes sir?
In the past, these were not considered divinely inspired. Is that related to questionable content or questionable authorship?
Probably more questionable content than questionable authorship. So authorship never was quite as big a deal as we would make it out to be now. But the content where they were just unsure that some of that fit with the other things that they had learned in the past. Some of it can be very good, just watch out. We can all say, let's learn from the past and recognize that God gives us strength or insight. It didn't add anything to the story. And quite frankly, I think more than anything else, what kept some of these from being considered inspired is they were written in Greek. Some of them there's a Hebrew original, but if they're written in Greek, people would say, well, that can't be ancient, that can't be old, that can't be something from way back. But it's going to be a lot of let's just encourage one another. So I would, people have often offered me a lot of books in German. And even though they are, I'm sure, fine, I've probably not kept many of sermon books from 200 years ago. I've just said, well, I'm sure they were fine, but I don't know that they are really going to be as helpful to me. I'd rather go and read the texts than just what somebody preached about it 200 years ago. Their illustrations and everything would probably be different from what I would use if I only have so much time on this earth. So there's nothing maybe wrong with it, but if you can't keep everything, then go back more to the sources than the others. So all of this stuff you have to try to figure out by guessing about why. And sometimes there'll be things that just don't make good sense. Sometimes there'll be other issues that come along. A real long one is the Ecclesiasticus, or the Wisdom of Jesus Sirach. So we have Ecclesiastes, which some people wrongly pronounce Ecclesiastics. So we have Ecclesiastes, and here Ecclesiasticus. What's in that word? Ecclesia, which is the Greek word for the church. Those who are called out. Ekkaleo, to call out from something, to be part of a special community. Remember with Ecclesiastes, what did Luther call it? Ecclesiastes, or the preacher, der Prediger. So he sees it as a sermon, the one that's in the Bible. This is never identified as from the Bible. The prologue to this. Whereas many great teachings have been given to us through the law and the prophets and the others that followed them, on account of which we should praise Israel for instruction and wisdom, and since it is necessary not only that the readers themselves should acquire understanding, but also that those who love learning should be able to help the outsiders by both speaking and writing. My grandfather, Jesus, give me his name in Hebrew. Joshua. Okay, Joshua. Yeshua would be Aramaic, Joshua would be in Hebrew. But he's known as Jesus here. After devoting himself especially to the reading of the law and the prophets and the other books of our fathers, and after acquiring considerable proficiency in them, was himself also led to write something pertaining to instruction and wisdom, in order that by becoming conversant with this also, those who love learning should make even greater progress in living according to the law. You are urged, therefore, to read with good will and attention, and to be indulgent in cases where, despite our diligent labor in translating, we may seem to have rendered some phrases imperfectly. For what was originally expressed in Hebrew does not have exactly the same sense when translated into another language. Not only this work, but even the law itself, the prophecies, and the rest of the books, which are the writings, the Ketuvim, differed not a little as originally expressed. When I came to Egypt in the 38th year of the reign of Euergetes, and stayed for some time, I found opportunity for no little instruction. It seemed highly necessary that I should devote some pains and labor to the translation of the following book, using in that period of time great watchfulness and skill, in order to complete and publish the book for those living abroad who wished to gain learning, being prepared in character to live according to the law. So he tells us that his grandpa wrote a whole bunch of stuff in Hebrew. He's putting it into Greek, and he's abstracting it. So he's going to give you in all of his chapters, what, there are 51, is it? 51 chapters. So it's a good chunk, page 110 to 172, so 62 pages. The whole thing, the entire apocryphal stuff we have here, is altogether 250 pages, about as equally long as the New Testament. Okay, so a variety of these different kinds of things that are there, that some people in the early church considered at least helpful. Jerome said, don't put these in with the other books, but they're helpful to learn. Later they mushed them all in together and said they will all be useful for teaching for us. But so almost 1/4 of the whole thing is from the Wisdom of Jesus Sirach. So then chapter 1, verses 1 to 20, and I have no idea why. The main reason that verse 21 isn't here is not everybody has 21 in their versions. So verse 21 says, the fear of the Lord drives away sins, and where it abides it will turn away all anger. Not everybody has that, so you go actually from verse 20 in praise of wisdom into 22. I'm going to read the first section for you to give you a little hint. I know you're not going to all go read all this. All right, so just once in your life you heard a little bit of kind of the tenor of it all. All wisdom comes from the Lord and is with him forever. The sand of the sea, the drops of rain, And the days of eternity, who can count them? The height of heaven, the breadth of the earth, the abyss, and wisdom, who can search them out? Wisdom was created before all things, and prudent understanding from eternity. You will notice here, some places in Proverbs as well, wisdom almost has a personality. That it exists kind of as a separate thing. Some people will throw that in together with the Holy Spirit and say the Holy Spirit is the wisdom of God, not a person. That was one of the heresies from the early church. The root of wisdom, to whom has it been revealed? Her clever devices, who knows them? There is one who is wise, greatly to be feared, sitting upon his throne. The Lord himself created wisdom. He saw her and apportioned her. He poured her out upon all his works. She dwells with all flesh according to his gift, and he supplied her to those who love him. One way that some people will talk about this as wisdom is kind of also the symbolic thing that you talk about with order. That wisdom, the way things are put together, that they work. That there is a kind of an order that God established in the universe, and that chaos, or the brokenness after the fall, is what happened when wisdom was rejected by Adam and Eve. The fear of the Lord is glory and exaltation, gladness and a crown of rejoicing. The fear of the Lord delights the heart and gives gladness and joy in long life. With him who fears the Lord, it will go well at the end. On the day of his death, he will be blessed. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and she is created with the faithful in the womb. She made among men an eternal foundation, and among their descendants she will be trusted. The fear of the Lord is wisdom's full measure. She satisfies men with her fruits. She fills their whole house with desirable goods, and their storehouses with her produce. The fear of the Lord is the crown of wisdom, making peace and perfect health to flourish. He saw her and apportioned her. He rained down knowledge and discerning comprehension. He exalted the glory of those who held her fast. The fear of the Lord is the root of wisdom, and her branches are long life. And then that's the end of that opening section. And then it goes on, unrighteous anger cannot be justified, for a man's anger tips the scales to his ruin. And so everything from 1 verse 22 all the way through chapter 23 here. It's instructions about the good life, about fearing God, about honoring parents, meekness, caring for the poor, friendship, enemies, the powerful, and sin. So all sorts of different things along the way where there'll be instructions about this. So chapter 7, do not exchange a friend for money, or a real brother for the gold of Ophir. Do not deprive yourself of a wise and good wife, for her charm is worth more than gold. Do not abuse a servant who performs his work faithfully, or a hired laborer who devotes himself to you. Let your soul love an intelligent servant. Do not withhold from him his freedom. Do you have cattle? Look after them. If they are profitable to you, keep them. Do you have children? Discipline them, and make them obedient from their youth. Do you have daughters? Be concerned for their chastity, and do not show yourself too indulgent with them. Give a daughter in marriage, you will have finished a great task, but give her to a man of understanding. If you have a wife who pleases you, do not cast her out, but do not trust yourself to one whom you detest. With all your heart honor your father, and do not forget the birth pangs of your mother. Remember that through your parents you were born, and what can you give back to them that equals their gift to you? With all your soul fear the Lord and honor his priests. With all your might love your Maker, and do not forsake his ministers. So you're going to get all these things about how to live a good and righteous life, how to be honorable, and all those kinds of things. And so as those are all put together, then they will be kind of a guideline along the way. And I've mentioned to you before that Proverbs in some ways is like that, where it wants to just talk about the very basic things of life and how you live that way out. I'm going to read a little bit from In Praise of Wisdom, not all of it, but chapter 24 is a unique one in here. Wisdom will praise herself and will glory in the midst of her people. In the assembly of the Most High she will open her mouth. In the presence of his host she will glory. I came forth from the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth like a mist. I dwelt in high places, and my throne was in a pillar of cloud. Alone I have made the circuit of the vault of heaven, and have walked in the depths of the abyss, in the waves of the sea, in the whole earth, and in every people and nation I have gotten a possession. Among all these I sought a resting place. I sought in whose territory I might lodge. Then the Creator of all things gave me a commandment, and the one who created me assigned a place for my tent. And he said, make your dwelling in Jacob, and in Israel receive your inheritance. From eternity, in the beginning he created me, and for eternity I shall not cease to exist. In the holy tabernacle I ministered before him, and so I was established in Zion, in the beloved city. Likewise he gave me a resting place, and in Jerusalem was my dominion. So I took root in an honored people, in the portion of the Lord who is their inheritance. I grew tall like a cedar in Lebanon, and like a cypress on the heights of Hermon. I grew tall like a palm tree in En-Gedi, like rose plants in Jericho, like a beautiful olive tree in the field, like a plane tree I grew tall, like cassia and camel's thorn I gave forth the aroma of spices, like choice myrrh I spread a pleasant odor, like galbanum, onycha, and stacte, and like the fragrance of frankincense in the tabernacle. Like a terebinth I spread out my branches, and my branches are glorious and graceful. Like a vine I caused loveliness to bud, and my blossoms became glorious and abundant fruit. Come to me, you who desire me, and eat your fill of my produce. For the remembrance of me is sweeter than honey, and my inheritance sweeter than the honeycomb. Those who eat me will hunger for more. Those who drink me will thirst for more. Whoever obeys me will not be put to shame, and those who work with my help will not sin. All this is the book of the covenant of the Most High God, the law which Moses commanded us as an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. And it'll go on there, and so other basic things about how you live your life, things about how you go or give and attend a banquet. What's the kind of smart way? So who's that, Heloise? Notes from Heloise or something like that, you know, or Ann Landers or Dear Abby or some of these kind of things are going to come there as well. So there's a discourse on honorable professions that comes in here: the physician, the farmer, the artisan, the smith, the potter, and the scribe. Some more instructions. Hurrying up because I want to get to the end of this to do a little reading for you. The cosmic order in chapter 43. And then in praise of famous men from chapters 44 to 50. Let's see. I'm going to skip the one of the cosmic order, but I'm going to start with 44. Let us now praise famous men and our fathers in their generation. See, first of all, wisdom, follow that, but now let's look at people who lived in the past and try to be like them. The Lord apportioned to them great glory, his majesty from the beginning. There were those who ruled in their kingdoms and were men renowned for their power, giving counsel by their understanding and proclaiming prophecies. Leaders of the people in their deliberations and in understanding and learning for the people, wise in the words of instruction, those who composed musical tunes and set forth verses in writing. Rich men, furnished with resources, living peaceably in their habitations. All these were honored in their generations and were the glory of their times. These were some of them who have left a name, so that men might declare their praise. And there are some who have no memorial, who have perished as though they had not lived. They have become as though they had not been born, and so have their children after them. But these were men of mercy, whose righteous deeds have not been forgotten. Their prosperity will remain with their descendants, their inheritance to their children's children. It goes, their descendants stand by the covenants, their children also for their sake. Their posterity will continue forever, and their glory will not be blotted out. Their bodies were buried in peace, and their name lives to all generations. People will declare their wisdom, and the congregation proclaims their praise. Who would you guess is the first one? Huh? What? 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 Lois? Huh? Who would you guess is first? No!
Adam.
No! Don't any of you know how to read?
Well, according to that,
Enoch, thank you very much. All right. Gotta see if anybody's catching anything here. Enoch pleased the Lord and was taken up. Now, don't make it too hard.
Enoch.
Enoch pleased the Lord and was taken up. He was an example of repentance to all generations. Noah was found perfect and righteous. In the time of wrath he was taken in exchange, therefore a remnant was left to the earth. when the flood came. Everlasting covenants were made with him, and that all flesh should not be blotted out by a flood. Abraham was the great father of a multitude of nations, and no one has been found like him in glory. He kept the law of the Most High and was taken into covenant with him. He established the covenant in his flesh, and when he was tested, he was found faithful. Therefore the Lord assured him by an oath that the nations would be blessed through his posterity, that he would multiply him like the dust of the earth and exalt his posterity like the stars, and cause them to inherit from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. To Isaac also he gave the same assurance for the sake of Abraham his father. The blessing of all men and the covenant he made to rest upon the head of Jacob. He's acknowledged with him with his blessings and gave him his inheritance. He determined his portions and distributed them among the 12 tribes. Chapter 45. Then it goes on to a guy named Moses. Then Aaron, and then on. Phinehas. Who's Phinehas? Huh?
Aaron's raised.
Aaron's grandson, who rises up and kills a guy who has married to a woman of Moab. So he is given a special covenant. Joshua, Samuel, Nathan, David, Solomon, Elijah, Elisha, Hezekiah, Josiah, Ezekiel, Zerubbabel, Nehemiah, and Simon. Who's Simon? Simon the Hasmonean, the fifth of the sons of Mattathias. We'll talk about him later. Whose son, John Hyrcanus, became the king. Whose grandson, Alexander Jannaeus, was a real bad guy, ruling as a king out of the priestly family, at which time the Romans are going to take over. So the last one comes very, very late in the story. So anyway, that's a little bit of Sirach. So I'm going to do a couple of these quickly. I'm going to save Maccabees for after the break. But Baruch, just a very short thing. Who is Baruch? Jeremiah's scribe. What does he end up in Babylon for? Thought he went down to Egypt. Well, here they got him in Babylon. And with prayers that are prayed, and another hymn to wisdom. See, a lot of this is live the right kind of life no matter what. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. And then a lament over Zion having fallen. The letter of Jeremiah is actually chapter 6. It says the foolishness of believing in idols. So Jeremiah writes, Jeremiah says it, Baruch writes it down. Since you know by these things that they are not gods, do not fear them. 9 times it is said in that chapter. Don't fear wood or stone or metal or what is powerless. Then you've got this little thing here with the prayers in the prayer of Azariah and the hymn of praise. I want to read you a little bit of that hymn of praise here from Daniel. This is, you should recognize this if you hear it. So this is from what would it be? After Daniel 3 in Greek. There is, first of all, a prayer of Azariah in the flames, and there's a little bit of history about how all the guys who were close throwing fire into the furnace to put them out, or put them to death, that everybody else dies along the way. And then the 3, as with one mouth, praised and glorified and blessed God in the furnace, saying, Blessed art thou, O Lord, God of our fathers, and to be praised and highly exalted forever. And blessed is thy glorious holy name, and to be highly praised and exalted, highly exalted forever. Blessed art thou in the temple of thy holy glory, and to be extolled and highly glorified forever. Remember, the temple does not exist at this point. It's been burned down. Blessed art thou who sittest upon the cherubim, and lookest upon the deeps, and to be praised and highly exalted forever. Blessed art thou upon the throne of thy kingdom, and to be extolled and highly exalted forever. Blessed art thou in the firmament of heaven, to be sung and glorified forever. Bless the Lord, all works of the Lord. Sing praise to him, and highly exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, you heavens. Sing praise to him, and highly exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, you angels of the Lord. Sing praise to him, and highly exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, all waters above the heaven. Sing praise to him, and highly exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, all powers. Sing praise to him, and highly exalt him forever. And then it goes, Bless the Lord, sun and moon. Bless the Lord, stars of heaven. Bless the Lord, all rain and dew. Bless the Lord, all winds. Bless the Lord, fire and heat. Bless the Lord, winter and cold. Always with that, sing praise to him and highly exalt him forever. Dews and snows, night and days, light and darkness, ice and cold, frosts and snows, lightnings and clouds. Let the earth bless the Lord. Let it sing praise to him and highly exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, mountains and hills, all things that grow on the earth, you springs, seas and rivers, whales and creatures, birds of the air, beasts and cattle. Bless the Lord, you sons of men, and sing praise to him and highly exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, O Israel. Bless the Lord, you priests. Bless the Lord, you servants of the Lord. Bless the Lord, spirits and souls. Praise him. Bless the Lord, you are holy and humble in heart. Bless the Lord, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. For he has rescued us from Hades and saved us from the hand of death, and delivered us from the midst of the burning fiery furnace. From the midst of the fire he has delivered us. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Well, Hodu Ladonai, Ki Tov, Ki Le'olam Chasdo. Bless him all who worship the Lord, the God of gods. Sing praise to him and give him thanks to him, for his praise endures forever. All right, then two little things at the end of Daniel, chapter 13 and 14. First of all, Susanna. When Daniel's a very young man, before he's done any of the other stuff that he does, he hears about a woman who has been accused of cheating on her husband. And they're going to put her to death because the evidence of 2 elders is enough to condemn somebody. He says, by the way, before you put her to death, would you do a favor for me? And poor Eliakim, the husband, he's kind of going nuts about this, or Joachim, the husband. He says, well, get those 2 guys apart and ask them, under which tree did you see her cheating on her husband? They wanted to have sex with her, and she said no. So then they concocted a story that they saw her with somebody else. And so the one says under a mastic tree and the other under a gum tree. And so Daniel says, see, their stories don't match, and then they get put to death.
They get put to death.
They get put to death. Yes.
Wow.
Chapter 14, Bel and the Dragon.
How things can be turned around.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So it's like the story with Haman, who wants to hang Mordecai. You be faithful, God will help you out. So Daniel...
That is the word, isn't it? Being
Huh?
faithful. Faithfulness is...
Stay with the floor that you're standing on. Don't jump. Don't jump away from it. The last one here before our break. In exile, there are people who say, oh, Baal is a powerful god, and he is a very voracious eater. So Daniel says to the king, you sure? Yeah. Put a bunch of food in there every day into his temple, and by morning it's all gone. So well, let's do a little experiment here. So he takes ashes and he sprinkles it all around on the floor. After the food has been put in there by the priests, then they seal it up. The next morning, the king and Daniel go in, and there's a whole bunch of footprints on the floor. There was a secret entrance where the people were coming in and taking food, the priests and their families. So he kills them all. He said, I guess there isn't any God. So mocking a God who doesn't exist, but they're saying, oh, he's really a hungry guy. Then we got somebody who eats too much. They've got a dragon that they're worried about. How are you going to kill that dragon? They just stuff the thing full of food until it's so fat and it can't move around, then go kill it. So one's about food doesn't get eaten, the other's about way too much food that gets eaten. And then there's this little hint at the end about Habakkuk who comes to feed Daniel in the lion's den so that he can survive for the days until he's in for a week in this little edition. I've mentioned the Maccabees. We still have some references to the prayer of Manasseh and 1st and 2nd Esdras, and then to look at some of the conclusions. I'm not going to go through all the details of this with you, but here's the deal. When the Persians took over from the Babylonians, under Cyrus and then under Darius, or Darius, and then Xerxes and Artaxerxes, and a couple of each of those. Finally, the Persians ran out of steam when they tried to take over the Greek Empire. And Philip of Macedon, which is northern Greece, he begins to win victories. He has a son named Alexander, who we know as Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, in the 330s and until the 320s, he goes east and takes everything from the Persian Empire all the way to India. He takes over all the way down into North Africa. And so when he dies of a fever that he caught, he was only in his 30s, I think, at the point, the kingdom is divided. There are various ways in which they give you the names of these. Altogether, I think there were 5 of his generals that had something that they took over. But there were 2 of them who were particularly involved in the region of Syria, which is Seleucus, who was one of his generals, and down in Egypt where Ptolemy, Ptolemy, was another one of his generals. Now, what Alexander brought was the Greek language and what we call Hellenism. The word for Greece in Greek is Hellas, Hellas. It's on all the maps today. The land is called Hellas. And so the Hellenistic age is the one where they believe that it's important to bring their philosophy, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle was one of Alexander's teachers. And so learning about life and everything like that. And so when they divided up among the generals, because he didn't have any kids who were old enough, the Ptolemies not only control Egypt, but they also control the land of Israel. They are a little bit more tolerant. You do what you're supposed to, keep everything going, we won't have any problems. You can do your own thing. But about 125 years into this, the Syrian Greeks, the Seleucids as they're called, take over the land of Canaan from the Ptolemies, just in battle. They all wanted that. It was a kind of a travel route, a trade route. And so without getting into every little bit of detail, we have 3 different kind of scenarios outflowing at the same time. From Seleucus, we have a son named Seleucus and a son named Antiochus. So there is going to be a fight between 2 parts of the family for controlling that kingdom of Syria and Israel. And that goes click-clock back and forth, and it's an absolute mess. In the land, we have, particularly after Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, we have different priestly families who each want to control the priesthood. One is the Onias family, the Oniads, and another one is the Hasmoneans, who were not the main line who were supposed to be high priests. But the Hasmoneans, Mattathias is the dad's name, and he's got 5 kids, 5 boys who are all involved in actual battle against the Seleucid Greeks. Within the priestly families, even within Onias' family, there are those who want to go along and those who want to fight and fight against this. And so, which temple is the important one? The Oniads ended up going and building a temple in Egypt at Leontopolis. And they go to a passage from Isaiah that says that in the city of the sun there's going to be a temple built. And so they say that's where it's supposed to be. And the people in Jerusalem, the religious leaders there, aren't really the good religious leaders. From Mattathias and his family, you will end up with the last one becoming actually not only the high priest, but the king. Sometimes that family, the Hasmonean family, sides with one side or the other from the Seleucids. So the Ptolemies kind of show up a little bit. They're still trying to get something back, but mostly it's a squabble among the family leaders of the Seleucid family. And so I'm just going to mention a couple of these names. So Ptolemies are in Egypt, Seleucids are in Syria. The Ptolemies control Israel till about 198, then the Seleucids take over from there. Seleucus IV rules till 175. Onias III liked the Egyptians better. He had been the actual priest and in line, A relative of his, a different Simon than the one from the Mattathias family, is pro-Syria. So he's trying to position himself to become the high priest. Then there's a fellow who kills Seleucus IV, Heliodorus. You ever heard of Heliodorus? We heard of him just before the break. He's the Heliodorus who's mentioned in the Judith's story. Okay, wrong place. He's thrown in there, so I think it's popped around all sorts of places. So Antiochus the fourth is put in. He's called Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus, which is God manifest. Such a loony guy, they used to call him Epimanes instead of Epiphanes. Epimanes means maniac, personified. You didn't usually tell the king that to his face. You could do that once. So Onias fled, and he later gets killed. His brother Jason rebels against this crowd, and he gets killed. Then Antiochus IV has a general named Apollonius, and if you don't remember any of these, that's all right, but just if you get the big concept down, Antiochus Epiphanes tried to make friends with the Jews, and then all of a sudden, when this Jason guy heard that Antiochus had been defeated in battle trying to take over in Egypt, he says, now it's time for us to kick all of them out of the temple and take the city over. And so in 167, Antiochus Epiphanes turns the temple into a shrine to Zeus, Jupiter. Okay. In the process, he kicks out everybody who's got any religious stuff going on. It's during this time then, you've got three different things that happen. Some are massacred, some flee and go elsewhere, and some submit. And each one of those will then play out in the history from then on. The Hasmoneans, and the name Hasmonean may actually have been a derogatory term, but that particular family, later known as the Maccabees because of one of the kids, Mattathias, as a priest, he leaves Jerusalem, and he and his kids become guerrilla warfare people. Okay, the kind of thing like we're struggling with, where they live amongst other people and they may be using other people as human shields. And so he has 5 sons: John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. All right, Eleazar, he's kind of like my favorite of the bunch, because in one of the battles, he gets right under the royal elephant and kills it. He gets squished in the process. I thought you'd figure that one out. Got right under the elephant and killed it. So anyway, Mattathias says to his sons, do what you need to. Judas becomes the general. He's the third of the sons, I think, here, yeah. And he becomes the general who's going to do these guerrilla warfare tactics against the Greeks. In 164 before Christ, they take the temple back. On the 25th of Kislev, they have a celebration for 8 days. And they rededicate the temple. Hanukkah. Okay. They find a little bit of naphtha, which was used to keep the candles or the lights burning, and it kind of spontaneously starts, and so they have enough to last them for 8 days until they can make the oil for the lights once again. That's where the 8 days of Hanukkah comes from, so a great time of celebration. That's why Judas, from the tribe of Judah, or from connection with that, he's from a Levitic family, but called Judah. No wonder they had people named Judas. Jesus has 2 disciples named Judas. Okay. We see that as such a horrible, terrible name, but at that point it was the name of a hero. Name your child George or Abraham or John Kennedy or something like that, where you would name it after somebody who's very important. So Judas finally defeats Apollonius and retakes the temple back in 164. And then from then on, you've got cousins. Antiochus and Demetrius' relatives on down, plus a guy who says he is an adopted son of Antiochus, and they're each finding people on their side or the other side. They're making promises to the Hasmonean family, we'll join with you. They're making other promises to the Oniad family, which should have been the priests, about what they will do with them. There's even a guy named Alcimus who has no claim to being part of any priestly family, and he thinks he can become the priest and get all the loot in the temple, and he dies a pretty tragic death in there. Finally, Judas Maccabeus gets killed. Jonathan takes it over, and Alcimus, the guy who got the general Bacchides to kill Judas Maccabeus, he gets himself killed. Then you've got Alexander Ballas, who says, I'm Antiochus IV's son by adoption. Antiochus apparently died a very, very wicked death, and some sort of very, very painful physical diseases that did him in somehow. But anyway, Alexander says, I'll join in with the Egyptians, and then we'll try and kick out the Syrians. We'll get the Greek, or the Egyptian Greeks in here. By the way, just a parenthesis, by the time of Jesus, some of the Jews had gone down into Egypt at the time of Jeremiah. Josephus says there were 1 million Jews in Egypt. Most of them are on Alexandria, the northwestern part of the Nile Delta. So when Jesus and his parents they go down to Egypt, they're not going into complete strange territory. That's why we have the translation of the Septuagint, because of Jewish people who could not read Hebrew anymore. So they put it into Greek because of the Hellenistic age and all of that. So anyway, back and forth. I'm not even going to play the game with all of these, but along the way, finally, there's only one son left of those 5 sons, Simon. He gets himself anointed high priest and king, and later is able to successfully put down from that Seleucid family anybody who would try and stop him, and takes over. His son John Hyrcanus becomes the king, actually, in name. His son Alexander Jannaeus is this really, really bad guy. So along the way, you've got people in Jerusalem who are not true priests. That's why a lot of them wouldn't like the whole stuff with 1st and 2nd Maccabees, because it's not a proper priestly family that's involved in that. But the Jews had also tried to make agreements and covenants with the Romans over time. And so when they were having trouble with the Greeks, they just called the Romans and said, would you guys help us? Pompey came in and then helped himself to the country. So watch out who you make your friends, because they are your next oppressors.
How many years did the Greeks?
The Greeks controlled it somewhere around 100. John Hyrcanus 134. So you've got roughly 200 years that the Greeks one way had control. Then you've got about 100 years of independence before the Romans take over.
I'm glad I'm with such good people.
Okay. So one of the Romans who took over, they had some Edomites who went into southern Israel. One of them, Antipater, who helps the Romans out, he has a son named Herod who grows up in Rome. Half Jewish, half Idumean. And so Herod eventually becomes the king in 37 BC, or 4 BC. And so, but under Roman rule and control, and then you've got all the Herods after that. So, main thing, large picture. The Jews came back in 539. By 520 to 516, they rebuilt the temple. They are under the Persians all the way until Alexander the Great in the 320s, 330s, right around in there. Then from that, for about maybe 200 years, the Greeks kind of have, first of all, the Ptolemaic Greeks for 125 years, and then for 75 years, the Syrian Greeks are controlling it. Notice, all this time through, no independent kingdom, no ruler from the tribe of David, not even waiting for a Davidic king. Okay, it's all with the high priestly family. Before whom does Jesus stand? The high priests, Annas and Caiaphas. So even under the Romans, the high priestly family was where the power was. All right, but there was a lot of hatred, a lot of bitterness a lot of wickedness that goes on from the Jews over against those who wouldn't cooperate with them in their kingdom. So it's not a nice, pretty, settled relationship. It's nothing like everyone had peace and they sat under their vine and under the fig tree. And many of these people, you side with the wrong side, and all of a sudden your whole city's burned down. So there's a lot of hatred from this time period as well. Question?
Is this the Maccabees era in which the Masada comes into play?
No.
No.
This is the era of the Maccabees, but that's not Masada.
Is it the, oh, I thought it was during that rebellion.
No, I'll come to that in just a second. So the Maccabees now is the story about Mattathias and his sons.
Okay.
Now, Masada is something that's built by Herod later. So post all of this stuff. Herod the Great, who wasn't the great during his lifetime, but only called Herod the Great after his sons and grandsons and everybody were ruling. So Herod is the one whose family will be ruling when one of his kids does a poor job of it. Then the Romans put procurators like Pilate and the others in for a while. Herod was expanding and rebuilding the temple and many other projects. And there were Jewish people who did not want the Romans there at all. And so they start a revolt in AD 66. So here, Antiochus Epiphanes is 167 to 164 BC, that it's a secular temple. So you've got to do that 164 years plus another 66 to get to where you have the time of Masada. Now Herod had built Masada as one of his retreats. About 1,000, a little less than 1,000 Jewish people go there, and the Romans tried to kill them in AD 70. And they, I think Gamla is 73. I think it's AD 70 for this one, when they all take their lives. But that's New Testament. That's post New Testament. So that would be even a little bit after Paul dies in Rome.
Oh, okay, that's much later than.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you're roughly, what's 166 plus 66? 230 years, something like that, would separate the Hasmonean era and this other one. I need to tell you my little story about Masada for just a second. Kathy and I were at Masada once. We went on an archaeological dig, the first German-Jewish cooperative dig in like 60 years that we were on down in Beersheba. And we had met a young lady the year before in German school. She was Jewish, and her parents had fled from Germany during the Second World War. And they said to Yael, why don't you go learn a little German? She knew English very well and knew Hebrew very well. And so we met her down southeast of Munich, where we were in our Goethe Institute. And she said, you ever get to Israel, look me up. And so she and her boyfriend Tommy met us very early at Tel Sheva one Saturday morning. And we went all the way along the Jordan and then came back through Jerusalem to Poland, where her mom and dad lived. And so she said, we'll go to Masada. Well, I wasn't very smart about those things then. I mean, I heard about Masada, but didn't know much more than that. And so we got there about maybe 7:30 in the morning, and we're going to climb Masada. We're going to go up to the top. And there is a path that goes all the way up. It's Shabbat, so I didn't think that we were going to have the chance to take the gondola, because I figured they wouldn't run on a Sabbath day. Later I found they did. So Kathy and I are climbing up. Yael had just had an appendectomy, so she went back down. We didn't have a hat. We didn't have any water. By 9 o'clock in the morning, it was 115 degrees, and we're doing the snake path all the way up to the top. You've been on the snake path? Did you walk it?
We didn't walk it.
Didn't walk it? That's a shame on you. Tommy, her boyfriend, just zipped right up. Nobody was coming behind us because the gondola started to work. And so I had, Kathy would sit down, I'd push her 20 feet, try and help her to keep going. I mean, she was just really not doing well. She was having heat stroke, I think. Huh? Well, we get to the top, we get to the 15 steps, and here's a Jewish baby doctor from New York getting out of the gondola. And he said, well, you're pregnant, aren't you? That's when we found out we were going to have a nap. At that moment. I went and I got her some water and never saw another thing about Masada the whole time. We got her some water. It took us an hour to get up. It took us 2 hours in air conditioning to get her well enough to be able to go on the rest of our journey. And that's where we found out. So Janelle remembered that too. I've told that story before, apparently. Yes, I have. So anyway, but that's a much later story.
Okay,
And
it
then
comes in post-New Testament?
Some of the last New Testament, the Gospels may have still been getting written at that point. But it's post-Paul.
Post-Paul, okay.
Post-Paul, yes, Alita?
In my timeline, it says Masada calls to the Romans in 73.
It is 73 for that, okay.
But in this
All right.
timeline,
The rebellion, the war against them started in 70. So that, I had both numbers. There's a Gamla as well that I don't know exactly, so thank you. They didn't like the Jewish people very much for what they did. So anyway, in 132 to 135, they had a second revolt. And when that was done, Jerusalem got burned down. And it got turned into a Roman city, Aelia Capitolina. And the Jewish people were told, you're not even to live here anymore. But that's all New Testament stuff. But when it says Jesus went up to the temple in John at the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter, that's Hanukkah. Okay, so they'd have been celebrating that, sort of like, some other day beyond just the first days of independence there. So anyway, First Maccabees is a very secular sounding book. And so it's basically just kind of like 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, but without, and if you read 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, you don't see much reference to God. God is the unseen kind of one in the back. Every once in a while you see something like Elijah going up on Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, but a lot of it is just telling the narrative of what took place. And so it talks about the treaties and everything. 2nd Maccabees is a little bit more about the priestly part of it. 2nd Maccabees, I'm going to read you a little bit of this, is from the time of Onias III and some of the worship kind of things. So the 1st Maccabees has almost nothing about worship and almost everything about just the historical thing of the various leaders. If you just plain read it through, you're going to go, what in the world's going on here? Because often you have an Antiochus and another Antiochus. Because it's Antiochus the 4th and Antiochus the 5th, and they were used to put them in that way. So you got 3 Antiochuses in there, you got some Seleucuses in there, you got some Demetriuses in there, you got Lysias and some others, and you can't tell the players without a program. Now I have a commentary I'm reading on 1st Maccabees right now. That's 576 pages. Okay, 2nd Maccabees, I think that volume is a little shorter, only about 500 pages. So no way we're going to do more than just wave on the way by. Okay, but to realize that in 1st Maccabees, it's you stand in there, God will help you on your earthly trek. 2nd Maccabees, if you read that, it's a whole different kind of thing. There's more about miracles and more about angels and God helping in the battles. And Jonathan Goldstein, if I have it correctly, who's the author of those 2 volumes, says those 2 are different versions of the same story. One saying God's involved with us, there's going to be a time of resurrection and restoration in the future. The other one says you just stand in there and you be faithful while you're there. And your existence is through your ancestors, not through who you are. 2nd Maccabees is the stuff where you begin to see references to resurrection. I'm going to read you a bad chapter. Okay? Just going to read it to you so you've heard it once. It happened also that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested, and were being compelled by the king under torture with whips and cords to partake of unlawful swine's flesh. One of them, acting as their spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our fathers." The king fell into a rage and gave orders that pans and cauldrons be heated. These were heated immediately, and he commanded that the tongue of their spokesman be cut out, and that they scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mother looked on. When he was utterly helpless, the king ordered them to take him to the fire, still breathing, and to fry him in a pan. The smoke from the pan spread widely, but the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die nobly, saying, "The Lord God is watching over us, and in truth has compassion on us, as Moses declared in his song, which bore witness against the people to their faces, when he said, 'And he will have compassion on his servants.'" That happens to be Deuteronomy 32, which I spent 7 years of my life doing a doctoral thesis on. And that's from chapter 32, verse 36, I think it is. After the first brother had died in this way, they brought forward the second for their sport. They tore off the skin of his head with the hair, asked him, "Will you eat rather than have your body punished limb by limb?" He replied in the language of his fathers and said to them, "No." Therefore he in turn underwent tortures as the first brother had done. When he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." Now's when you start having resurrection talked about. To come back alive, as God says those who have died unjustly are going to come back to life. Some of the other stuff says if you're faithful and honorable, things will happen for you already now, like Tobit, like Judith, like Esther. But what happens if some people die? Then resurrection is the answer to that. Okay, it's just not talked about much in the Old Testament. You've got Daniel 12, which also talks about late events. You've got 2nd Maccabees. You've got a passage in Isaiah 25 that says God will bring a restoration, but very little of detail of what goes with that. After him, the third was victim of their sport. By the way, I heard this, and we read this through in Greek in Septuagint class about 7:30 in the morning. There is no time of the day when this is easy to hear. Okay, but this was held up as, you do this no matter what. You stay faithful. It's directly against the Maccabees who fought back on the second Sabbath day. Okay, there's a tension between these two. When it was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands and said nobly, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws I disdain them, and from him I hope to get them back again." As a result, the king himself and those with him were astonished at the young man's spirit, for he regarded his suffering as nothing. And it goes on and on. I'm not going to take time for all of it. The mother encourages her kids to do what is faithful and righteous, and finally she gets killed as well. Verse 42, he says, "Let this be enough then about the eating of sacrifices and the extreme tortures." This one chapter is enough. There are probably more stories than that. So there are those who are held up because of their righteousness, and this is the time when it says that the world was created out of nothing. It says that the saints intercede for those who have fallen. They found some soldiers who had little medallions to some other god on them, and they were fighting for the Jewish people. And so those who found them prayed on behalf of their dead souls. That's where we have the foundation for the Roman Catholic prayer for the dead. That even if they haven't been all righteous, pray for them. And so those are the kind of things where this gives some support to it for the Catholic Church, which sees that as the inspired writings. Then
the Maccabees from the Samaria area?
Just north of Jerusalem, Modane is probably just into southern Samaria, yeah. But they would have fled from Jerusalem just to have a base of operations. First Esdras is about Josiah, Zerubbabel, and Ezra. It is very similar sounding to the book of Ezra, but there is a contest that Zerubbabel wins about what's the strongest and Three guys say, what's the strongest? The first says wine, the second says the king, and the third says women. And then Zerubbabel says, but truth is victor over all of those. He gets permission to go and return the temple, to build the temple. Nehemiah is not mentioned, but Esdras is there. Then there's a very short prayer. I'm not going to be able to pray with you, the prayer of Manasseh. These last three are not in the Roman Catholic scriptures either. Okay, but prayer of Manasseh, it says that he repented. In Chronicles it says he repented when he was taken by Nebuchadnezzar into captivity, and so this is a very, very nice prayer that it says was used. Second Esdras, there are revelations. This one is probably the closest to the apocalyptic. Here's the stuff that's going to happen at the end. Chapters 1 and 2 and 15 and 16 are said to be Christian additions to it. And so you read some of these things and you say, oh, that's kind of interesting of what you hear. Basically, Second Ezra says most of the wickedness of the world is gone. The time of restoration is pretty close at hand. So these visions that come. Then a little bit about biblical background. This is obviously way too fast, but you at least heard a couple things that you maybe didn't hear before. But first of all, the Old Testament, as I've talked about, is Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah and Nevi'im is the prophets, Ketuvim is the writings. The Jewish people do not have a New Testament, so they would call this the Tanakh, or Tanakh. Okay, so TNK from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. And a lot of the Hebrew Bibles that I have that are from Jewish sources, that you'll see that very easily on the back of the, or the binding of the book. What fits in the Bible? Canonical means what measures up to a standard. And so what you have here, first of all, is everybody would agree on the 66 books. Some of them in the New Testament had some people talk against them, but they become the canonical books for the church. So 2nd and 3rd John, Jude, Revelation, Hebrews, and James, or no, 2nd Peter, are talked against, where some people say we're not sure if they are inspired. So you have the prolegomena and the antilegomena would be the ones that are either spoken for or where somebody talk against. But that's just in the Bible. Luther said, I don't believe we should use books the Jewish people didn't consider inspired. And so we would talk about those as the Apocrypha. The follow-up to that, at the Council of Trent, the Roman Catholic council that met for 12, 13 years in the 1540s to early 1560s, on and off, they finally said, we are going to talk about the proto-canonical books, those 66, that everyone has always considered inspired. We're going to talk about the deuterocanonicals, the ones that are declared to be canonical in a second stage. So the Roman Catholic Church would talk about them as deuterocanonicals, but also canonical. They measure up to the level of being able to be used for doctrine. So if you went to a Roman Catholic service, you would hear readings from, not from 1st and 2nd Esdras or Prayer of Manasseh, as far as I know, but you could certainly hear readings from Maccabees or whatever. So another term that a lot of people will use is the term apocryphal. Apocalyptic means that so those are called the pseudepigrapha. I got 2 whole big, thick, fat books upstairs with those. The Book of Enoch is in there, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, the Assumption of Isaiah, and things you've never even heard of, that are all sorts of other writings. Those are much more the apocryphal kind of things that say, stand in there and be firm, you're going to be brought back to life. Hundreds of names of angels and all sorts of things. And what those do is they purport to be one of the ancient figures like Enoch, who wrote stuff down that was hidden. And in Esdras it says, Ezra copied the 24 books, they call 24 books, that are revealed, and another 70 books that were hidden for the last days to encourage people. And those are the apocryphal kinds of things. that are going to say, watch out, you're going to find a lot of things about animals. So when you read in Daniel about the bears and the lions and the paws and all those kind of things, those were all references to political figures who were problems. And if they read something about an animal, they aren't going to get it. They're all resistance documents, just like the book of Revelation. It's a resistance document. It says, you hang in there, you tell the gospel no matter what. But because they use it, instead of Rome, it says Babylon. So who's going to understand that Babylon means Rome and fight against Rome? If you're a Roman soldier, you wouldn't have a clue. If you were an insider, you would. Okay, and so some of the writings that are there, none of those were considered inspired by anybody. So the apocryphal things, it's where you begin to see these things, though, as I've mentioned, on prayers for the dead, and purgatory, that you have to be cleansed of the wickedness of what you have. The pseudepigrapha, as far as I know, are never quoted by actual wording and everything in the New Testament. There's a couple of references to some of that writing, but not in that great detail. So Old Testament written in Hebrew and Aramaic, New Testament's written in Greek, probably originally on vellum, which is animal skin. So they would scrape off all the fat, and they would take the animal skin. They'd use lamp black, which is mixed with oil, and there's something else as well that they would use to do the writing on that. Wrote very, very small. So normally you'd have maybe, I think, 10 inches high or so for a piece of parchment, and it'd be about 30 feet long, which is why our scrolls then, it got so long it'd be unwieldy. That's why you got 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Okay, and someone like the Megillot, the 5, where you can have that all in one manuscript together. So later on, just before the time of Christ, you begin to have papyrus used. Why would you think you all of a sudden begin to have papyrus used? Because you lived in Egypt. Exactly. And now papyrus doesn't roll as easy. So then they begin to put it into a book. They begin to put leaves together, and then they sew the leaves together to make a codex. So the 2nd century at the earliest, that's what you're getting when you've got them down in Egypt. They use what's available. Okay, so if you lived in Israel and you've got animals, then when they die, then you cure the skin out. But when you're in Egypt, then you find a different writing material and you use that. Along the way, the Hebrew text gets to be rather complicated because Hebrew does not have any vowel letters. Okay, so my name would be spelled T-R-P-P. Okay, now if you just took T-R-P, it could be tarp, it could be turp, it could be trip, it could be trap, it could be all of those different kinds of things. And every word that you have, just the consonants. Later, they took some letters and made them into letters that could be a vowel or a consonant. Do we have any language, any letters in our language that can be a vowel or a consonant? Why? Why? The only one I know of. So by, the way, and all of the words with that. So they did that with a Y, a yod. They did it with a vav. They did it with a hey. Sometimes with an aleph. So sometimes you'll have a letter and it's a vowel, sometimes it's a consonant. But there were people who knew how to read that out loud. And finally, in the centuries after Christ, somebody said, let's come up with a system. There's 3 different systems that they came up with. Tiberian, the region around Tiberias, up by the Sea of Galilee, is the one that we have used. And so underneath a letter, you might have, it looks like a little line, like a little T. That's a comet, or just a line, that's a patat, or 2 dots, which is a tsere, or 3 dots, which is a segol, or 1 dot, which is a hirek. Or you might have a dot up above after a letter, which is called a holem, or a dot in the middle of a letter, which is called a shurek, and other half vowels and things like that along the way. Because the Masoretes said people might not know how to pronounce that someday. And I can be very thankful that they put those in there. Because I've had to read some unpointed texts, as they say, from Qumran, which don't have any of the vowels. And it is a hoot to try to figure that all out. So along the way then, they would add those to it. That's the Hebrew and the Aramaic. The Hebrew Bible that we use is a printed copy from one that was handwritten about AD 1004. And that's the one that where it says here, I don't have, where did I put that? I don't have the BH 19K. I don't know why I didn't take that in there. But it is a
It's
copy
right in the
that
back.
is in,
Yeah, you got it.
it's on my sheet here. It's not on my slide. B19A, which is the handwritten copy. What's the matter? Huh? What about it? I can't hear you. Huh? VHS, yeah, Big Hebrewische Stuttgartensia, yeah. But that one, all of the stuff in the margins that they had, or down underneath, would be various marks that the Masoretes made, little observations. This form only occurs once, or something like that. And so they did a lot of their own study along the way. But what we use now is that text. If you go to the Greek text that we use for the New Testament, Nestle Aland or Westcott and Hort are the two major textual traditions that are used. There they have what they call a critical text. Not that they're critical of the text, but they've looked at every copy they can find. And they say, this is probably the correct reading here, this is probably the correct reading here, and they give other ones in the margin down, or in the footnotes down below. But with the Hebrew text, so far, nobody has ever said, we're going to make a critical edition of the Hebrew text where we think this is the correct reading. They just put notes in the margin. So if there's a Jewish person reading it, they know what that correction is, they just read it correctly as they're going through it. So for example, I'll give you just one quick example. The book is red. Please spell red for me.
R-E-A-D? Oh, R-E-D.
No, R-E-D.
Is it R-E-D? Is it R-E-D? Or is it R-E-A-D, the affliction of the proud?
I said
Huh? Which one is it?
take your pick.
You need more information.
Yeah.
You don't take your pick, you need more information.
Okay.
The book is read aloud. You wouldn't have any problem.
Yeah.
But, there was one in the commentary I was reading where there was an N instead of a U. Just flipped upside down. Okay, they didn't catch that one. Every once in a while I'll see typos. I found typos in the Hebrew Bible that I sent in and let them know that I had found some of the typo. And it just happens in this world that you get that, but most of them you can figure out pretty easily. That Old Testament Hebrew was translated into Greek. That's called the Septuagint. That's between 286 and 246, or 285 and 246 before Christ, in Alexandria in Egypt. The tradition was that that was done by 70 guys, where the word septua comes in from sept, that it was done by 70 guys, or 72, who each went into a booth and translated, and their translations all matched. So they said it's inspired because of that. It didn't happen that way. Nobody today thinks it happened that way. I have read translations of something I translated, where somebody from a particular German book translated in English. I can tell what they're doing, but there are 4 translations if there are 4 translators, because we'll each put things together our own way. But there are also some real big changes. So for example, in the Septuagint, God is farther away. Instead of God, it might be heaven. And so instead of God did this, this was done. And so there are a variety of things, as people have studied that, in the Septuagint, that are going to be renderings of what was comfortable for the people when the translation was being done. Our New Testament is, the quotations in our New Testament, most of them come from the Septuagint. Not all of them, because sometimes they knew it in Hebrew and just put it right out of their head. but a lot of them are from the Septuagint. So when the church goes out to tell the gospel, they've got a Bible already. It's called the Hebrew Bible, right? So when in 1 Peter it talks about that God had provided a rock, and then Peter says, and the rock was Christ. He's saying, you read this thing, now I'm telling you a little bit more about it, of what was really going on back there, and so it will update and say, here's the new covenant, the new agreement or arrangement that goes on. The New Testament, or the Latin translation, the Vetus Latina, the Old Latin, had been based on the Septuagint. And then Jerome came along in AD 390 to 405, and he said, I'm going to translate from the Hebrew into the Latin. That's what we call the Vulgate. Our word vulgar simply was the word for the common language that was spoken in the day. You go read the King James Version, you'll know how they talked in the 1600s. It sounds very odd to us right now, but that's the way they actually talked on the street, just the common everyday language. And so Jerome, he would go to Jewish butchers and say, what are the words for these? And then he'd figure out a good Latin word for whatever they told him was in there. He did that in Bethlehem. Jerome's a different story. He got thrown out of Rome for some really bad advice to people about how holy you had to be. And they threw him out, and then he went and translated for us. But anyway, if it weren't for him, we wouldn't really be using the Hebrew text much. He really kind of stimulated that. Luther translates into German. In 1522 for the New Testament, does most of that at the Wartburg, and then by 1534 he has the Old Testament done. He kept on working on that his whole life, kept on looking at things and improving it along the way in his own mind. In England, there was the law that you weren't supposed to translate it out of the Latin. And so William Tyndale, among others, Coverdale's involved in that, Wycliffe is involved in that. Tyndale got killed for translating the Bible into English. That they thought that was heresy to be able to do that. But by 1611, King James, who started in 1603, has what we call the King James Version. There's a lot of different versions along the way. Revised Standard Version, New Testament in 1946, New Testament by 1952. And then there's now a new Revised Standard Version that was done in the late 80s. They're talking about still another one. That's 25 years ago already. So as they keep saying, we don't like that rendering, or maybe this is a better way to do it, and language changes. So here's the thing that I think Lois was telling me about that I had at the very end with the Leningrad Codex. And Dead Sea Scrolls have many readings that are similar, some that are different. A lot of them are scraps. There's only about, I think, 7 full scrolls, and then there's just thousands of scraps that have been found. Best I can guess, Onias and his crowd took the library of the temple and hid it. And that the Essenes have a lot of what would have been the temple library down in Qumran. Whether or not that's for sure, but anyway, it gets us back 2,000 years ago to find out that the copies in 1000 AD weren't all that different from at least the significant thing. Now, there are some changes along the way, but not a lot of them. Yes, Lois? Richard?
A date on that.
A date on what? On Qumran? From probably the 200s before Christ until into the Roman era. The Qumran community was destroyed the same time as Masada and Gamla. So that's part of that first Jewish revolt, is when they got wiped out. They were there hoping that God would come and help them fight against the Romans. And so the people at Qumran, there were other Essenes who were married, but they were not married. They had no sex at all, no sexual activity, because they wanted to be always ready if Messiah came one day, that they could immediately march in battle against the Romans. And the sad truth is they probably got wiped out just like that. So the community was wiped out.